Hi, I'm Chris White. I am an associate professor of music theory in the Department of Music and Dance, and my big idea is about how much music had to change in order for it to be even possible to make generative artificial musical intelligence. Because think about how did you learn Twinkle Twinkle Little Star? You probably learned Twinkle Twinkle Little Star something like you were sitting in your living room and your mom or your dad sang Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to you, and then you sang it back, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And in that moment, music was a social activity. It was ephemeral. As soon as your dad stopped singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, it disappeared. It only remained in your mind, in his mind. It was an embodied activity. It was a timed activity, and computers can't learn about this, right? Computers need a durable, measurable object that they can study and then replicate. So what had to happen? I think about this in three big shifts. The first is taking musical memory and putting it into objects. It's 794 AD, Common Era. Pepin the Short has just made a alliance with Pope Stephen II. What Pepin gets is the legitimacy of the Roman Catholic Church in return for his military aid to the Pope. What Pepin wants is his churches to sound like Roman churches, to look like Roman churches, to feel like Roman churches. The problem is that everybody's learning chants the way that we learn Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, person to person, right? And so how do we get this musical memory shipped from Rome all the way up to Paris? Well, you have to start writing it down. And they experiment with a few different ways of writing, but then they converge on what we know today as the five-line staff notation, where you say twinkle at one point in this grid, and then twinkle, all right, that is 5 ticks up, twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. And so you put these ticks on the page 5 slots apart. And what we've done here is we've digitized our musical memory. We've said music is this event in a grid that we can now put on a piece of paper and ship around Europe. All right, the second big move that has to happen is performances have to get into objects. Now, we've been trying to make machines that make musical performance since the Bronze Age, but and that's a really interesting story, but I want to focus on the early 20th century. In 1916, the Aeolian Music Company is playing around with its new invention of a piano that can play itself. And what it adds to its invention is this capacity for a pianist to sit down and play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and for the inside of the piano to have this roll of paper pass by, and a stylus inside goes boink, 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 and note exactly when and where the pianist's fingers go down. And what's happened now is that music is not just put onto a grid to say what notes turn on and off, but it's what expressive capacities the performer's adding to it, where the decisions are being made, where things get faster, where things get slower. And so the performance gets into that musical grid. The third big thing that has to happen is that musical creativity itself has to become an object. Musicians often think about the compositional process as a bunch of if-then relationships. If you start on these notes, if you start here, then maybe you go here, or maybe you go here, or maybe you go here. And so it's this menu of options that you're negotiating. And this is so ingrained in the way that we think about music that when Ada King, the Countess of Lovelace, in 1843 is writing about the first computer program. She's saying, you know, these newfangled computers are probably going to be really good at writing music because they can just lay out these series of options and then through a little bit of math, negotiate through this menu. And they can create new music by just moving through these options. And this is exactly what occurs in the mid-20th century towards the late 20th century with increasingly sophisticated computational machines. And what they can do is take these digital representations of music that we've inherited from putting memory and putting performance into digitized representations. And it can notice, all right, these kinds of sounds tend to move to these kinds of sounds. And then when we group them together, then we can make this other group. And this allows computers to recreate the menu of options and compose new music through making these little mathematical relationships between its observations. And so creativity now has been put into this digital object. Why is this important? Well, there's good sides and bad sides to this. Good sides, more people have access to music, more people can create music. Downsides, well, at each of these moments, each time you put something into an object, an aspect of human creativity into an object, well, you are distancing the creator from the creation, right? Now, we've only been living with generative artificial intelligence for a few decades, really for a couple of years, and we're going to be faced with a bunch of new patterns of thought, a bunch of new policies that we're going to have to try to negotiate. And I think that music's history with putting aspects of human creativity into objects can really inform these policy decisions, these patterns of thought that we're going to have to negotiate. Because we can look back to people like Pepin the Short and Pope Stephen II, Ada, Countess of Lovelace, the Aeolian Music Company, and get clues and cues about how to think about dealing with this new disruptive technology. Thank you.